Hello, Sarah. Welcome to a special live broadcast of Robett Live, direct to LinkedIn Live, YouTube, and all the other different places. Why have I just popped up and decided to come here? Well, I'll tell you why, team. My phone yesterday afternoon, screenshots started coming through, things started popping off, phone started absolutely blowing up, and seems like we've had a little bit of quite the shift in the political landscape in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I know politicians. I am friends with some ministers on both sides. I understand a little bit how it works, but it's flipping nuts to me. And anytime something like this happens, and when everyone's so into it, I was like, you know what? I think there's a great chance that we should talk to someone that's smarter than this than myself. So without further ado, and this is also a public call and show. I've put a link in there. You can feel free to link through. One of the smartest mans in Aotearoa, New Zealand, one of the future forces of all things politics and nuts and bolts is Mr. Brad Olsen. Kia ora, my friend.
Kia ora.
I think I need to maybe get you some more like walk-in music, so you come through with some like.
Yeah. I mean,
So
as
you
long
come
as you
with
don't expect karaoke or something, that's probably where I draw the line publicly.
That's fair. Okay, you are deep in the trenches of this world. I'm sure your phone started to go off the same way mine did, but probably 10 times more because you are a lot more educated. At a macro, or maybe I'll start this. Did you know this was coming, Mr. Brad Olsen? Were you aware that this might be coming down the pipeline?
Not at all. And I mean, it's interesting looking back because there were some that were talking a lot more about this, right? Like, I know that Rachel Smalley, for example, was talking about how she thought that the Prime Minister would quit or make the announcement before December. I saw there's always a little bit of scuttlebutt around Wellington, the rumour mill's always going off. But realistically, I think that I still thought that the Prime Minister would give this one a go. Now, it's interesting in politics, right? And trust me, living and breathing in Wellington, you get this all the time. Everyone's always got that gotcha question where you've got to rule stuff in or out. And the Prime Minister had been asked a lot at the end of last year, will you be running? And if she gave any answer apart from absolutely, then everyone would be going, oh, what's happening? When's she leaving? There'd be a lot of rumours more going around. So I think, she had to sort of play that off. But realistically, the amount of vitriol, the awful stuff that comes through is challenging. Those, with a bit more of a political mind might well say that, hey, if the election numbers aren't looking good, for you might not be keen. But I think realistically, it's been a pretty intense period to be a Prime Minister for the last 6 years. There's been a huge number of events, but it has sort of, it's changed the dynamic. It's changed the feeling of Wellington. People I was talking to all afternoon yesterday were going, this is a big event, huge event.
Now, that's always the interesting one, right? Like I remember even when everyone knew Richie McCaw was going to retire after that last World Cup, and he never said it. And then it wasn't until someone literally went and said, "Oh, the Crusaders put their lineup for next year, and your name wasn't on it." And he was like, "Oh, might have to talk to someone about that." And everyone already sort of knew, right? But this seems like it was a bit to the side. So from the people that you're talking to down there, what was the tone of why? I mean, my main back channels were basically two camps. One is, feel sorry for all they had to go through, super hard and stressful time, got a young family, which I totally flip and get that side. The other side is like, oh, well, she knows she's about to get smoked and she's just lining up for the UN gig. So I was like, okay, well, that's like kind of the two ends from it. Was it similar in your channels within the back channels of what was happening in Wellies? Was that kind of the two camps of like pretty flipping hard and also kind of strategic? Where did it sit for the crew you were talking to?
Yeah, I mean, look, both of those very, very strong. I think probably a lot more people, in a sense, just still digesting it, but thinking probably more the first camp to start with around, look, just the amount that she's had to put up with has been incredible. And now, I mean, nothing, I do a lot of media, right? And I get a lot of fantastic feedback, if you will, from people afterwards. I know talking to female journalists that I know, good friends of mine, that they get even worse, far, far worse than what I'd ever see. And, talking to people in politics, the stuff that the Prime Minister would receive is just awful. So, I mean, I think that's been coming down for a while. But I think that combined with, look, I mean, you look at what the Prime Minister has had to deal with. She dealt with Whakaari, she dealt with the terror attack, she dealt with COVID in general, and the Parliament protests and similar. I mean, that gets very personal, that sort of stuff. I remember walking down the street, and again, I'm nothing in politics, and I remember getting heckled and yelled at by
Brad,
days.
Brad,
Jono.
hey, well, don't throw yourself down too. We know where this is heading, mate. You're going to have a new pocket square and some rollies before too long. You just don't forget where you came from. But anyway, continue on. But yes,
But I
I
think
concur.
the main one for me, though, I think is look, if the Prime Minister went through that conversation with herself over the summer and went, do I have enough in the tank to give it? Because as Prime Minister, you're on 24/7. That ain't a 9 to 5 job. That is absolutely everything all the time. You're making the biggest decisions, the smallest decisions, no matter what. And importantly, you've got an entire group of people around you. Yep, that's true. But you ultimately make those decisions. So I think, there was just a lot on. And I think realistically, you look at the New Zealand public, and if I'm an average voter, do I want a Prime Minister that's not 110% there? Probably not. And I think that's probably the evaluation the PM made. Now, to the other bit around, will Labour get trounced or similar? I think realistically, we've never seen a majority government under MMP. So that was an anomaly to start with. Coming off, having that many people in Parliament was always going to feel like a bit of a loss, but it was realistic. So if I was Labour, I probably wouldn't have been too worried about that on the whole. There was still a pathway for them to retain or keep government with the Greens, with the Māori Party and similar. And again, we're 9 months out from the election. Who knows what can happen? I mean, you look at 2017 election, that was apparently Nationals in the bag until it wasn't, until Jacinda Ardern herself actually went through. So I don't think I don't buy in that strongly to the, you get out of the sinking ship, because the ship, in my mind, it might have been taken on a bit of water, but it was just about a plane at that point. It was so high, so a bit of water wasn't too bad. The main one, though, all of this talk of, she's got a big gig lined up, I find that a little bit hard to believe, to be honest, particularly some of those UN jobs, remembering that a lot of them actually have to be voted on by various UN bodies. I mean, that's the reason that Helen Clark never became UN Secretary General, because she didn't get the votes from all the other countries. So I'm not as convinced that, in 2 weeks' time she'll have this big new flash gig. If I was her, I'd take a bit of time out. She's got a young child. She's got a partner that she's been wanting to marry for a while. Take a bit of time to yourself. I think she's deserved
it. I mean, her daughter, I think it's maybe about 4 or 5 now. You think? I mean, about that. So I've got
probably.
Yeah,
yeah,
like young buck somewhere. So I've got 2 daughters, 3 and 5, about to turn 4 and 5. And my whole thing that I proactively did with my bandwidth was, as soon as I heard wifey was pregnant with number 2, I was like, oh, jingle bells. Okay, let's clear the slate. And my whole thing was, this last 4 or 5 years of just like, let's just clear the slate so I can be a present father, right? And last year for a little bit, it got super busy, and I was smashing some pretty long days, and that went for a couple of months, right? I could only imagine, and I know the toll that actually took on the family life of literally not being able to potentially be there as present, or or mentally you're checked out, and that whole thing, you miss those years, right? And I've had it seem two ways with people that have gone on, especially around the motherhood thing or being a parent to a young child, is after you lose that shit, it's flipping done. And so you kind of also then wonder, like, is there a bit of personal thing going, shit, how much have I potentially actually missed the loss of my child's thing? Not that that's like the reason why, but from a personal perspective, that I can definitely see that. So now, a lot of people didn't really see it coming yesterday. A lot of people, the timing of it, do you think was like, hey, let's get through holidays, let's let everyone reset, let's this thing is obviously in the play. One thing that I thought, and you actually might know a little bit about this too. So I met a minister that's in her inner circle last year. Good dude, flipping good bastard. I really liked him, really thing. And I was just talking to him. I was like, hey, like, I don't know Jacinda personally, blah blah. What's the deal? What's that? And I was like, what's the biggest misconception that being inside the circle to what others on the outside don't? And without even flinching, he's like, she genuinely cares about people close to her way more than anyone would ever see. I'm like, huh, is that so? I was like, what's that? Yeah, it'd be like, she'd be texting, ringing up on kids' birthdays, this and that, and check just actual, but no one would ever see it. And I was like, huh, I never didn't know that. So, and then the other side, then you obviously get the business side. She stuffed the country, she's done this and that. I was thinking about today, early in the gym, I was going, even if you win and become prime minister, even if you're the best of all time, 1 out of every 2 people probably still hates you. So why would they do it? And maybe just jump on this for a second, Brad. When you think about the weight of that, do you wonder sometimes why politicians decide to do what they do in a landscape where even if they win, they're still hated by like genuinely probably hated by probably like 50% of people? How do you have you worked out the craziness of why people do what they do in that crazy world that is Wellington, my friend?
Oh, it's an incredible gig. I mean, look, when I was at university, the people, my friends, the people I went to university with, a lot of them now work in government departments. They might work at Parliament and ministers' offices, or for Parliament itself and similar. I have not met anyone that is not a politician yet who is in the political arena who is like, you know what, I'd give that a crack. In fact, all of them are like, I wouldn't go near that with a 10-foot pole. And I mean, I think it is interesting because it's long hours. You're right that there's always someone that hates you. There's very strong emotions in that place and similar. And you don't have any you don't have any private life, and I think that's the more difficult thing. And I mean, look, my job, I travel around the country, talk to a lot of people about what's going on in the economy, and I think the one I've been challenged with a lot is just how personal some of the attacks get. People, especially last year, with some very, very strong views against individuals in government. Now, I get it; they are the leading face of what's happening. But I would like to think in this country that we can play the ball, not the man. The conversation should more be around that's a really dumb policy. I hate that policy. It's absolutely killing my livelihood or similar. I'd like to think that it shouldn't be quite as visceral against the person. Now, that's both ways, and it really is both ways. Both sides of politics often get that. I remember some of the stuff that John Key, that was talked about with John Key as well, was sort of similar. So why do the politicians do it? I think because genuinely they are there to make a difference. In fact, the good ones, that is certainly the case. Now, we can argue till the cows come home whether or not they do make a difference, or if it's a good difference. Again, different sides of the political divide will say different things. But I do genuinely think when you meet up with these guys, they are in it to make a difference. And importantly, a lot of that, in my mind, comes down to how much they can get out and about, talk to real people in real situations, and understand what's making life difficult and how they can improve it. That's the gold standard. Now, the politics of the day, if you will, and all we see on TV with question time and the yelling and the sort of sledging and what have you, that is, I genuinely think not, that is just a very small part of it, but it's a very usual part of it that we see. So I think realistically, it's the sort of thing where, importantly at the moment, right, there's a lot of talk about Jacinda Ardern and what her legacy is and what have you. I get that, and I think it's good that some people are thinking about it. I got a bunch of calls yesterday asking what it was going to mean for the economy, and I remember saying to someone, well, look, the major thing for me is what happens for the next 9 months. There's an election 9 months away. There's going to be presumably a new prime minister put in as early as Sunday. They've got some work to do. Inflation isn't waiting up for them. The risk of a recession coming through, like, let's be real, there's some real stuff. So I think it's important that as much as we think about the people and the personas and the personalities, there's some real nitty gritty when it comes to government of actually just getting stuff done. And so the big question really going forward is, what has the Prime Minister left to do in the next few months, and what does her successor look at trying to achieve? Because we can't just sit around and sort of mope around and wait for an election in 9 months' time, because real people are seeing real effects in their lives each and every day.
Jeez, I telling you, mate, Brad, you're getting better and better at this shit. Like every time we chat, mate, you come in, your sound bites just get for more fiber. I can't wait. Just please, is there a chance that someday you may actually go into politics yourself? Like, is that would you ruled it out 150%? Is it ruled out 150%?
Oh, I'd never rule anything out. I mean, gosh,
you are going to do it. You're going to do it.
Well, hold on. In the economy, trust me. I mean, look, over the last few years, definitive forecasts of things have never turned out well. I've said before, this is my personal view. I've said it publicly, I've said it privately, I've said it as many times as I can. Representative democracy is about representing people. If enough people eventually ask me to look at representing their interests, I would think about it, as I think about anything. I mean, I've never had a plan in life. Stuff comes down, opportunities come down, I'll have a look at it. But certainly at the moment, I am more than comfortable in my economic role. I feel like I can make a difference. I feel like I can highlight some of the big challenges that are in front of the country. So no plans at the moment, but I mean, I wouldn't rule out becoming a police officer either. I'd love to do that in my life. So nothing's ruled out, nothing's ruled in. Nothing specific, mate.
Yes. Yeah, honestly, it's like you've already been indoctrinated into the training of PR. With it's just gold. Hey, but you brought up a couple of points I actually wanted to jump in on. You talked about legacy and left to do. So maybe let's start with legacy, then left to do. What do you feel like? Obviously, we're in it, and there's a reason in the states that you have to wait at least 5 years for anyone to get nominated for the Hall of Fame. Let things settle, blah blah blah. Like now, everyone's hyped up. There's, I think, to your point as well. There's a lot of vitriol and the way she's been treated. We a little separate section. Macro zoom out 10 years from now, what do you feel after the dust has settled, recession, blah, blah, all that? How do you feel this sits in 2034 to 2033?
I think it's the sort of thing where you're right, we're going to have to wait a while, because there are some of the bigger changes that the Prime Minister has either made or has set in motion that will have, in my mind, bigger implications in years to come, but they're not going to be seen immediately. The reform of the Resource Management Act, all of our planning sort of rules and that's important. It's not finished yet, but the Prime Minister got it underway. She got a bipartisan agreement with the National Party around increasing densification of housing across the country and all of that. That's positive stuff in my mind, but we won't see it for a while. I think, again, it sort of depends a little bit on who you talk to. I know that some of the comments out from, say, the agriculture sector yesterday, they were pretty happy to see the announcement of the Prime Minister resigning. They're not a big fan of her at all. But I think, again, look, climate change is real, and it's happening here in front of us, and we've got to make some changes. Those changes are uncomfortable. From an economic point of view, more broadly, I think that we've still got the long-term issues that we had before. The housing market is still cooked. Productivity still isn't great. We haven't got our education system in the right place. The government tried to reform it, and at the moment we seem to be spending a lot of money on some of those reforms that haven't yet borne fruit. But in saying that, if you look at the short-term economic impact, New Zealand at the moment still has one of the best economic and health responses of any country in the developed world when it comes to COVID-19. We have far fewer deaths. We've got an unemployment rate that is at near record lows. The economy is far bigger, than it was pre-pandemic, and certainly relative to how hard the hit would have been. That's not to say everything's fantastic. Inflation's also at a 32-year high. But certainly when you look at the government's immediate response to COVID-19, they backed businesses, they backed livelihoods, they backed people's lives, and there are more of us here today because of it. So that's an important legacy. But I do think that it's those longer-term things that New Zealand politics has always struggled with. How do we get people working smarter, not harder? How do we pay people more effectively for doing less? How do we think about those technological gains over time? I don't think that the Prime Minister got there, but I think that there are some things that she certainly can be proud of. There's stuff that also hasn't worked out. You look at Kiwi Build. I mean, where did that go? You look at the housing market up 40% and more unaffordable for young Kiwis than before, the lowest home ownership rates on record. There's been a lot of building, which is true. So I feel like, again, really depends on who you talk to. You can come up with a great story or the most abysmal economic collapse in history. I do think that in all seriousness, the economy could have gone a lot worse. It could have gone better, but realistically, after a century, the largest economic shock in a century, I don't think we performed too badly, and that was because of Jacinda Ardern and Grant Robertson's immediate and very decisive changes at the start of COVID-19. We've got to respect that.
So if it was a tweet in 2040, what do you think that looks like what do you think that reads for legacy?
Do I get the 180 characters, or do I get Elon Musk's like 4,000? Oh, okay.
No, we don't have Twitter Blue, mate. We can't afford that. We're in a recession.
Inflation. Yeah. Inflation. I feel like it's the sort of thing. Big plans, smaller delivery, and sort of over promise and under delivered, I think, is just a realistic outcome. But some bigger, more fundamental changes that do put New Zealand on a better path. But at the end of the day, politics always stops larger change. Let's look at her legacy. I mean, she after John Key did the same thing, ruled out ever changing the age of super, ruled out putting a capital gains tax in. Both of those, I think, are the wrong move, but they are politically expedient.
Now, the left to do bit. So maybe let's talk about timing for a sec. Obviously, the way politics work is very timed out. It's very coordinated. It's very calculated. What I've learned personally after some bump-ins in the last little bit around how this world works, there's definitely an iceberg and some other shit that happens, right? How do you, if you were Prime Minister, knowing that you were potentially personally tapped, which I can definitely understand, what the future looks like, don't know. Would you have made the same strategic play timing wise for, get through the holidays, everyone comes back, reset, now hit it, give it enough time for the election so it doesn't feel like it's kind of like a flipping hospital pass if it was happened in like May or some shit? Like if you were Prime Minister, is this kind of how you would have probably done it? Oh, you've gone mute. Can you hear me? Hold up.
What about that?
There you go. You're right.
Sorry,
Your
I've
pocket,
got a
your
button down
pocket square.
here.
Your
Yeah,
Rolex. Your Rolex hit it, and it just went on mute. The Rolly.
See, I thought someone wants to shut me up. No. Look, I would have made two differences from I think how the Prime Minister played this out. The first one is that I probably would have not set the election date myself. If I'm not going to be Prime Minister, then I'd let the new person figure out that. I probably would have indicated that I would have held it around XYZ date, and unless there's a good reason to depart, the incoming Prime Minister is probably going to stick with it. But I think that it just would have been a good call to let the incoming Prime Minister decide on when that happens. The other one is I probably would have, just from, again, politically expedient point of view, would have been good, I think, to have a successor a bit more locked down or slightly anointed. And I say that because, look, she immediately said, look, Grant Robertson's ruled himself out of the race. And that would have been who everyone, including myself, would have gone, reckon he's next one in. So now you've sort of got this awkward position that no one's talking about who might be running ahead of the caucus conversation on Sunday. There's lots of ideas of who might give it a go and how many people each vote might get. But I feel like because of it, you've got quite a wide field, and it means that either you don't have any clarity anytime soon, or you sort of, as a caucus, you fracture everything, which means that for Labour now, I do think it becomes more difficult to win the election, not necessarily because they don't have Jacinda Ardern, but because they've got to rebuild their entire plan of what they do in an election year. They've got to figure out who they're taking forward as the leader. And they've got to figure out that if there are people, more than one person who wants to be leader and has a serious shot, what do you do with that? Because, certainly in politics, that level of ambition often can breed a lot of dissent. You've seen that in the Labour Party when they went out of government in 2008. You saw that in the National Party after they left government in 2017.
So those are really good points, Brad. So it's a difference of like, you're playing 5-on-5 basketball. Scottie Pippen gives an alley-oop to Jordan and it's dunked and done. This is kind of like LeBron just goes and sits on the sideline, but there's no new captain really set up and they don't know how long the game's going to go for. So optically, it probably shows more of a weakness because it actually wasn't consolidated or do you think that would be because she kept these cards close to their chest and she didn't want to actually bring too many in to create more chaos? But I think you're probably right. Do you think, let's rewind it back a bit, if we say, hey, this is one thing you're doing, Grant, you step up, have a bit of a build, you decide the date, then it's like, hey, he's my homie, I'm tapped out, he's stepping in and he's going to do it. And that would be a bit more of a flow to strengthen the overall position. Do you think it's actually potentially weakened it off a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, Grant Robertson and Jacinda Ardern are good friends, and so I have no doubt they spoke about it and spoke about what he was thinking of doing as well. I mean, that's certainly what the reporting seems to suggest. I guess the thing there is once Grant had ruled himself out, and look, to be honest, I sort of would like to see him rule himself back in. I'd like to see people messaging him and sort of saying, mate, give it a go, because I've got a huge amount of time and respect for Grant. He's done, in my mind, an incredible job. But what I would have done then is said, well, who's next then? Because I think, again, the difficulty is that if all of this takes a long time, that's not good for the Labour Party themselves. They won't be happy with seeing their dirty laundry sort of aired out and different divisions coming through. And look, if you can't get someone with 75% of the votes by Sunday, then that says that, your caucus, when you go to the election, aren't necessarily united behind someone. So the question, I think, in my mind would have been, let's be real, Jacinda Ardern still has a huge amount of sway over that caucus. They look up to her. She is their leader. And so, is that the time when you have some of those backdoor conversations like, again, National had when the likes of John Key came in and brought Bill English in and had a conversation with Jerry Brownlee? Do you go in and say, look, we think that Chris Hipkins, for example, is the next best man, but we think that, say, Kiri Tapu-Allen is a good deputy to bring in at the same time, but Michael Wood, we want you to think about doing this sort of area. Now, I mean, I think there's an element of politics of those outgoing leaders not wanting to stitch things up too much and letting those who are going to stick around make their own decisions. But I always think it would have been cleaner to have that a bit more of an idea of what the next team is, because it effectively highlights, and I mean, look, this is something that we talk about in corporate boardrooms all the time. Your board always wants a succession plan. You want to know who the next chair and deputy chair is, otherwise it becomes very unruly. In politics, it seems like the only plan ever is to go expecting that, the most popular leader ever is always the most popular leader ever and nothing changes. And then when it changes, you just seem to implode for a bit. Every party seems to. I think it's a really random way of going about leadership.
We've got a not a fan of Jacinta that's chimed in. He's like, do you think something else is going on? Criminal charges, rather quick exit?
This is Wellington. I mean, Wellington is always lighting up right about different conspiracy theories and what have you. And I mean,
go on.
Gosh,
what are some of the best ones? Hit me.
Oh, I mean, some of them are really actually quite awful. I mean, there's all sorts to go around, and I personally don't want to give them a lot of time because there is nothing to them. I mean, it got to the point where the police, who never comment about a person's individual possible charges, they'll talk about real charges, had to put out a statement saying that the Prime Minister's partner wasn't under investigation. I mean, that is a little bit over the top. I mean, I enjoy a good conspiracy theory every now and then, but sometimes it gets pretty personal. So, look, in all honesty, no. Because again, I live in Wellington. This place lives and breathes rumour, but more importantly, it lives and breathes scandal. So you wouldn't be able to contain that sort of stuff. It would be out there, and there would be corroborable evidence out there all the time.
Lucky Snapchat didn't exist when Clark was a DJ back in the early. It's so
well. You say this right, but like I mean, you think of the next generation of politicians. Like there is going to be some interesting stuff that might come out at some point.
So to that point, and this is something I have actually talked about this once or twice, where I was like, I can't wait for prime ministers and every president in 2050 onwards, because every single person is going to have dirt, which is going to actually equalize everything, because it's like, we're all human, we all stuff up, we all did stupid things and partied and did this and that, and blah, 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 whatever the thing may be. So I actually think it humanizes it away from realizing that everyone's not just in the ivory tower. Everyone is young and does stupid stuff. Everyone has said things that they don't think. I mean, dude, you can look at my text messages from probably yesterday and I've probably stuffed up doing something like, let alone 10 years ago, my emails. I mean, I've even done, it's just, I hate the false perception of everyone thinking that these humans aren't flawed. These humans don't have mistakes. They don't have their own, things which they're dealing with. So let's talk about we talked about legacy. I wanted to talk about left to do. You said left to do between I guess now in October, so 9 months, right? In your head, looking at the state at a macro, if you're prime minister or a new prime minister, not that you'd ever think about it because you'd never rule anything out because Mr. Brad Olsen doesn't close anything out for the future. What would you potentially be thinking of, like what you feel is most mission critical of left to do between now to then to build the party back up to a stronger thing for the next election?
Look, I mean, inflation and the cost of living is still the chief economic concern, and will be for the rest of the year. In my mind, it'll be a massive part of the election. So I think if I'm in those sort of positions of power, I'm thinking about what sort of support do Kiwis need, particularly those who are struggling the most. Now, you look at someone like myself. I don't like paying high fuel prices or whatever it might be, but I can afford it. I can also decide not to go out to the beach on the weekend or whatever it might be if it's too expensive. If I'm a low-income New Zealand household, I'm paying, I'm living hand to paycheck to paycheck. I'm having to make sure that I've got enough money to put the basics on the table, to put a roof over my head, to drive the kids to school and myself to work. There's not a lot of fat to trim there. And so I think, some of those policies have got to be a lot more targeted. Last year, the government's fuel tax subsidy, which was very popular, but was just economically stupid. It gave 3 times as much support to those on the highest incomes as those on the lowest. I mean, that there said that you want to help out the rich more than the poor at a time when the cost of living is high. That didn't make a lot of sense. So I think there's got to be more thinking about that. But for the government as well, one of the big things that they talked up a lot at the end of last year was how much they've got on their plate at the moment. They know they've only got 9 months. They need to prioritise. And by prioritise, I mean actually prioritise. You can't have every single thing on the books. So a bit of a conversation, I think, needs to go on around what is most important. What, if we don't do it now, could kill Kiwis, could put us in such an irreparable position that we can't get out of it, and what stuff can we leave on the cutting room floor because it's just not critical? And I look at something like the Radio New Zealand TVNZ merger and I go, hey, maybe there's a case for it. I don't personally see it at the moment, but is that the sort of thing that New Zealand must desperately do in the next 9 months, otherwise stuff implodes? No. Do we need to get more nurses going? Do we need to get our hospitals in better shape? Do we need to ensure, again, that we've got sort of, good food supplies and similar, given all the raging weather that comes through? So I would, if I was them, and they've signalled this already, is take a pretty close look at what their current agenda is for the next 9 months, come up with some very clear, very defined priorities of what they need to and can achievably do in those next 9 months, and put the other stuff on the back burner. That's the most simple and efficient way about it.
So Jacinda wakes up, she's no longer Prime Minister. How do you think the headspace will actually be feeling? She's like, finally, breathe, rest. Like, do you like what part is political and what part is personal? If you were to take a percentage of both, what would you feel the players?
I feel like the easiest sort of split there is 50-50. Also because I feel like, look, when you get to that position, again, your personal and your political life are so intertwined, it's not funny. They're inextricably linked. I don't think you can fully divorce them from each other. I think it's the sort of thing where, look, if it was me, I probably wouldn't know what to do with myself. If you've been in the role that long, then your life is dictated by that. You'd be waking up normally and you'd have your diplomatic protection service guys that are taking you around. You'd know that you'd have a stack of papers. You'd be talking to your press secretary. You'd be talking to your chief of staff about things. At some point, and I mean, I feel like John Key said this after he left the prime ministership. Sort of said, I just got in cars and I got in an Uber and I realized I had to book it myself and I had to tell them where to go. People didn't just follow me around. It's, the whole apparatus, if you will, falls down. So I feel like at some point when the Prime Minister does fully leave that position, it'll be a remarkable change in life. I think as well, though, what's interesting, and just, watching some of the comments and what have you coming forward, I think there is a huge amount of division in New Zealand. There's a huge amount that normally comes through at the end of a third term government. And I mean, you saw some comments at the end of last year from some government MPs. There was one up in Hamilton who sort of said, I think I'm good in government, but probably not opposition. It was like, mate, that's not the way that you communicate out about it, in my mind. So I think it's interesting because I do think that there's been so much that the government's done the last few years, and they've got themselves so ingrained in people's lives that people are very legitimately quite angry about where things are sitting. And so there is a lot of vitriol going out. I just worry, and this is from all parts of the political spectrum, that we've lost the art of sort of disagreeing agreeably. I don't have to, like what you say, but we should be able to have a conversation like we're having now. And look, I mean, Robert, you come back and tell me well, this is, I guess, the thing. You wouldn't tell me I'm an idiot. You'd say I just disagree. And I think here are my reasons why. I think we can't do that anymore. And I think that's a really bad place for the country to be in.
Well, the bit that I've always, it's not even a struggle, right? Because I've, say my journey, right? Like I'm Māori, so proudly Māori on that side. Then I grew up on benefit and welfare, so I understand the labour side. Then I got into some business shit, so I understand the national side. And then I'm obviously being the ex-pro snowboarder, I understand the greens and the environment, all these different things. I'm homies with everyone on all these sides, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't have these debates or conversations, and I'm always interested. The way I think about it is like, the more perspectives I know, the wider my lens gets. So then it just gives me more intel. The more intel, the more you can do. And it's never so binary. But one thing to your point, Bray, which I do agree with, you said the word vitriol before, which I want to come back to. When we'd gone through COVID, it came to a point where New Zealand's energy just felt so toxic and horrible and just divisive, but really personal. Like, it was like, she's a bitch, stuff her. This dude's a dick, stuff him. And it became like, literally, like, it wasn't policy, it was personal. And I actually wondered about this, of going, if there was a 6'5" flipping 100 kg rig, do you think people would still be talking down to the person the same way? You might think he's an asshole, but you wouldn't be potentially as so vindictive and attacking. And I feel that through COVID, from what I saw, it almost felt like many Kiwis almost felt empowered or enabled, that they've got the right to have that opinion and then attack the person for it as well. And I think where it sort of gets to, it sniffed a lot of what the vibe is politically here in America, where it's like, literally, you can't tell me what to do in my country, America, blah, 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 blah. It's like, hey, like I get that, but it becomes so binary that you almost can't have a conversation, right? Because if I live in California, that means I'm some progressive, far left, liberal, blah, blah, blah. And if you go far right, then and it's even by a state. Like, I don't know if you saw the dynamics of, when a lot of Californians through COVID went to Texas, there was this crazy tension there between Texans and Californians trying to come through to change culture, blah, blah. So do you feel that because she was young, because she was female, because the world was pent up, because literally people were locked in, they couldn't get out, there was just more pent up anger and toxicity that existed within the regular Kiwi over these last couple of years that actually then didn't exist 10 years ago or so? Do you think these other external environments changed the psyche of how the average Kiwi sort of operates?
Yeah, I mean, partially. I mean, to take a step back, I think we've got to remember as well that for a great part of the last term of government throughout the COVID crisis, the Prime Minister was on TV every single day at 1 p.m. answering questions. And I mean, that's why I mean, in terms of the government took a much more prominent part of anyone's life than they have at any time probably in New Zealand's history. So, I mean, that's a big one for me. And I think that reflects a lot in terms of people probably feeling like they could attack the Prime Minister more because they probably felt like they knew her more. And I say that in terms of, look, I can do a TV interview and the next day all sorts of people are wanting to have a yarn. I've never met these people in my life, but they feel like they're your best friends and that you owe them 5 minutes. Now, I'm cool with that. I love the conversations, but it's an interesting sort of dynamic in how people respond. I think as well, though, the position that Jacinda Ardern occupied is quite different from others. I mean, you look at when we had the Prime Minister of Finland come over to New Zealand, and someone asked, and I just, to be honest, absolutely honest with you, I think it was just a clumsy way of phrasing the question, but there was a huge amount of backlash when, the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister and the Finnish Prime Minister were asked, how do you guys just know each other, and are you friends because you're both sort of female leaders who in younger ages and similar? It's like, I don't know, you don't ask if Joe Biden and Donald Trump are good mates because they're similar old white guys, and similarly, I hate those sort of conversations. I feel like they're real reductive. I feel like a lot of the questions that the New Zealand Prime Minister recently was asked was just not stuff that was necessarily asked of other Prime Ministers. So I do think there's a bit of a gendered thing in there, but in all seriousness, I don't think that means that anyone else gets away scot-free. I mean, I've seen some of the comments that people make about the likes of Christopher Luxon. I can tell you myself that, gosh, in the last week, people have been finding photos of mine from like a decade ago on Facebook and posting them on Twitter, and sort of apparently because I had a photo with John Key one time, I'm a National Party stooge. I don't know what they're going to think when they see the photo of me with Grant Robertson or Jacinda Ardern at different points. Like, it really it grinds me, because I feel like, again, it just highlights that you're immediately pigeonholed, and it means that the only time I know if I'm doing a mediocre job, if you will, is when I get equal messages on the same day saying I'm a Labour Party hack and a National Party stooge. It's not that simple. And I think because of it, we just don't have those conversations. So the difficulty is when you pin someone down and you sort of, take a very one-dimensional look at them. You look at the Labour Party in general. They are not one big homogenous group. You look at the likes of Stuart Nash, who is generally speaking a bit more on the right wing of the party, someone like Michael Wood, who's on more of the left-wing part of the party. They're all in a similar bubble, but they are not the same person. I think that's a conversation that we sort of need to get out of, because, again, I don't think that the average member of the Kiwi public is that indoctrinated in politics that they think if you are that colour, therefore this is your entire gig, that you don't care about this group and you only care about that group. That's way too reductive in New Zealand politics.
Well, it feels like it's just become more binary, right? It just feels way more like American wannabe, with like, I'm either left or right, and there's no way in the middle. And there's some people that could be extremely capitalistic in terms of how they want to, generate wealth, and then also same time extremely philanthropic with how they want to do things on the other side and protect about the, there's no ways to do it that way. So let's just, argument's sake, I know you never rule anything out of the picture, but let's just, argument's sake, you just woke up tomorrow and potentially you were like Prime Minister. How would you strategically take on the challenge to create a more open New Zealand, for dialogue, right? Because if you think about the actions externally that comes from execution of awareness and the education for the way they think and feel, how would you look to try and, I'm not saying make it the way it was to make New Zealand great again, or make New Zealand love again, or whatever it may be, but there's been some threads of negativity and toxicity that have made its way through society over the last, say, 5 years. How would you look to try and change that back to make New Zealand better so we can be more proud of the people that exist within it and actually who we are?
Look, I'd go out and listen. I'd get out into the communities. Now, I say that because 2 years ago, I mean, I'm in the economics gig, right? And a lot of that is we're looking at spreadsheets and we're looking at numbers and what have you. But I made it a sort of bit of a personal goal a few years back, 2021 it was, to make it to all 67 local council areas in the country. And I did it all the way to the Chatham Islands, from, up in the far north down to Southland. Last year I did all 66 of the mainland ones. Chatham's I hope to make it back to this year. And I went there and look, I was more than happy to offer my views and what was coming through with the economy, and people were very happy to listen and have a bit of a yarn about it. But equally, they were keen and happy to share their ideas. They wanted to know that people were listening, that I could tell my whangareis from my wanganuis, and that's critical to me. I think you've got to get out, you've got to listen to people, because people deeply respect when you go there, and it's not just the classic. I mean, I'm not in the government, but you hear this a lot of time, when someone from Wellington arrives, it's sort of like, hi, I'm here from the government, I'm here to help. It's sort of like half the time, yes, there's some stuff that government needs to do. Half the time, government just needs to sort of sit down, shut up, and listen for a moment, because locals know what they need. There's a careful balance there, but I do think that in all seriousness, getting out and about, getting there in person, seeing people, taking the time to listen and thinking about how you can make a difference, that's one way not only of making better change, but also ensuring that people come on the journey with you. The issue with politics, I think, a lot of the time, particularly here in Wellington, is that the view within 5 kilometres of the beehive is almost completely diametrically opposite to what you hear once you go 5 kilometres away. So getting out there, getting a bit more perspective and thinking, hey, now that I understand the issues, how do we make this better, would be a way to go about it.
What do you think the biggest issue New Zealand, like culturally or in the culture and community process, similar type thing, do you think that we're facing now coming into 2023?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I mean, I was going to say, look, my classic's always around economics, which is why I think about inflation and similar. I think probably a conversation around how we actually make things better as a country. And I think also somewhat of a conversation of how do we make sure that we don't let perfect be the enemy of good. There's a lot of times when we say, and look, Wellington again, classic example here, it has to be the gold-plated option. If there is any possible flaw or chink in a policy, it cannot go ahead. I think we've got to sort of look at the 80-20 rule and go, how do we give this a pretty good crack, sort of get it towards the right position, rather than waiting longer and longer and making it cost more and more to find the absolute most brilliant idea. And that's why I look at something like the government's cost of living payment last year. Were people happy with it? No. Did it cost us some money? Yes. But did it get money into the hands of those who needed it the most? Also, yes. So on balance, not the worst policy in the world. I can get behind that sort of thinking.
What are you most fearful of in the next 9 months after yesterday's announcement? When you think of it, is there any many red flags that you're looking at? Potential, obviously dissent within the caucus if there's not enough majority, or the way it's been left, not so much an alley-oop, like, or whatever. Like, are there any glaring red flags you're looking at right now going, oh, geez, maybe no good?
I do sort of worry that, look, the election campaign was always going to be pretty grueling because of all the stuff we've talked about and how bad those conversations are. I think realistically, the worry more generally with politics is that we lose access to politicians, that we all have to go into such a security scared state that things don't come about. So, I look at some of the protesters that are going on and man, I will defend to the hilt their ability to protest, but peacefully. And I think, it's that sort of thing where for all those conversations around my rights have been breached, the fact that in doing, the protesting that some of these guys are doing, they're breaching other people's rights, to sort of go, hey, fair's fair here, team. There is a bit of a balance we need to come through here. So I'm worried that eventually it's going to be really hard to bump into a minister going across town, or that you can't go to a town hall meeting with them because there's, guys, you'd effectively need an armoured personnel carrier to take these guys between the airport and the next meeting. So that's my worry, is that politics becomes harder and harder to engage with, that we become sort of steelier on those edges. And so instead of sort of looking at how we work best together, we sort of just divide ourselves even more. That's a genuine worry.
That's also a fair call too. I figured out how I can give you claps. I can give you claps. Give me 1 sec. Look at this. That's claps. I don't know if you can hear that. That's some claps. No, it's a good banter, right? And one of the things I maybe wanted to just jump into on just a quick sec was, um, I feel there aren't becoming many safe spaces to have harder conversations, and it's getting me more and more uh, worried about a future where, probably to your point, we could have binary opinions, but it doesn't need to be a toxic conversation or a thing. How have we got like that? Because we never used to be like that. What went
Look,
wrong for us?
I think part of it is often when we have some of these conversations, they are a little bit without context. And now I'm not going to place the blame fully on social media, but that's not the most helpful bit, if you will. I tweet something out today, and I mean, actually, this is a good example. We put out some analysis here at Infometrics on Monday about grocery supplies and similar, and about various cost pressures and a whole bunch. We put out a full 2-page note with a whole bunch of insights. I did a bunch of interviews that day. I got absolutely piled on by some, and I will call them trolls, that came through. And the thing that concerned me the most is that they came up with stuff and they're like, oh, Brad said that the labour markets in other countries have turned around and similar. I went back to my comments. Nowhere on earth did I say anywhere like that. And so I feel like the disinformation, the misinformation, the just complete and utter bullshit that comes through is huge. Now, I don't know exactly how to combat that. I'd like to think that people just in general are smart enough to go and have a look at the source. I've encountered that enough time. My entire job is sort of, the old idea of, trust but verify. I'll take what you're saying at face value, but I will go and analyze it afterwards. I'll go and have a look at the sources. I'll see what's coming through. So I mean, that's difficult because we're not having those conversations, but it means as well that I feel like all these conversations, we have them in a much more guarded tone. I'll show up to a place and I don't want to say anything that might even be considered controversial because someone's going to jump down my throat. I remember last year we had that catch up in Auckland. There were a whole bunch of people there, and I mean, that was great fun. Good bunch of people as well, because you could say stuff that, again, isn't actually controversial. It's just a good chat around, is this a good idea or not? We can develop and discuss the pros and cons without it turning into, oh, well, you say that, therefore you must hate the Prime Minister and you hate the country and you hate people and you just want to, we go right to the extreme. I can't believe it sometimes. So I think a little bit of cool the jets, a little bit of take a breath, a little bit of finding the right group of people who are not so heavily involved, if you will, that they immediately jump to conclusions. Because I do think that we start sort of, at dipping a toe in, and the next person's got a submarine at the bottom of the pool. Like, we need to chill out just a bit.
I would agree. Another thing that I've found helpful is genuine perspective on the scale of the realities of how things are. New Zealand is a country of 5 million people. The world has billions. We have all this stuff, and so much it seems like we're fighting against each other for it. I love a banter, and I love a fight. I love a scrap. I love flipping, getting active, getting in there. But I'll happily go heads up against anyone with passion, but you can still actually have that chat and then go through it. And if over a long enough conversation, you should be able to crank it down. But I want to maybe just switch tones for a little bit. I've been interested in I wouldn't say your personal brand rise, the trajectory of your public facing image with this. You're the same dude, right? Same dude. I know, same thing.
I hope so.
How have you navigated? And it'd be like politicians get this 1,000 times more than what you're now getting. You're in these circles, you're starting to get these trolls, blah, blah, blah. How have you started to navigate public opinion of you as a person for your personal thoughts or work, and that it's only going to get bigger and bigger and gnarlier over time? How do you mentally compartmentalize what you say or how you roll, or just a bit of strategies or formula to what you're doing? Because you're thinking about it a little bit, because if someone says, Brad sucks, he doesn't know shit, and the next guy's like, oh, Brad's amazing, whatever. How have you navigated this emotion and energy of people you don't know talking about you personally publicly?
Yeah, it's real interesting. I mean, I sort of mentioned before, when we were talking about politicians and sort of what they go through. And I remember, again, going back to talking to some of my mates who worked at Parliament and similar, and they sort of say, I wouldn't go anywhere near politics with a 10-foot pole because of these reasons. I sort of looked at my life and I was like, man, I feel like a lot of those reasons sort of apply to me in a sense. I think one, I feel like there's a need to, I'd never want to get cocky with this role. I never want to think that I'm the man and that, I can demand certain things. And I feel like you see people like that over time. So in my mind, you keep a good group of people around you who keep you humble, keep you grounded, sort of keep you knowing what's up. So I love it when good friends sort of rip me out, because it gives me, it just it keeps it real. I feel like you've got to try and keep it real. Again, getting out and about, so I feel like I'm being as genuine as possible. So I try to do that travel as much as I can to get out and about, because it's important for me to understand what's going on. I still use the evidence. That's critical for me. You've got to have all of that. In terms of coping with it and how I sort of respond, I mean, probably not well is the short answer. Everyone says don't read the comments. I think it's important to understand the feedback. I think the difficulty is, or the balance there is, that if I read the comments, I just can't take everything to heart, because increasingly I've got to remember that particularly those who are commenting on social media, and some of them, they become, if you will, regular commentators. It's like, mate, I watch the news a lot and I read the news a lot, but I've never found enough time in my life to write that much vitriolic content about someone. So I sort of go, I've got to moderate that a bit. Out in public, it's interesting. I'm increasingly a lot more conscious about that. People will sort of be like, and look, again, I'm, and I mean this genuinely. I'm not that big of a, not that many people know, but enough people sort of, they'll turn their heads every now and then, like, who's that guy? And I'll go out for coffees with mates, and they'll sort of be like, Brad, they're looking. It's like, yeah, they are. They're trying to figure out where they know me from. So, I mean, sometimes I love to have a yarn. People come up in the stream, want to have a chat for a bit. There's often in person, the feedback's way nicer. I have had very few people who are like, walk past like, you're a dick, I hate you, go and die. Have a lot more of that online, or via emails or written letters and bits and pieces. So in person, people are way nicer. They're a lot more fun. But I think as well, it highlights that I've made this choice. This is something that I've decided to do, and I'm totally cool with that. The difficulty is I haven't decided for my friends or for my family that they should get into it as well. So I'm always a lot more cautious. If I've taken photos with people, for example, I'll often try and sort of message them and be like, hey, you okay with this going up? Like, and do you want to be tagged? Do you not want to be tagged? Like, I don't want to sort of throw you in it, because again, I chose this life, you didn't. That's difficult. I don't like that, and I mean, I'd like to think that I could just post away and people would sort of just see it as a bit of a portal into my life, but it becomes weird after a while. People message people, So look, I still think it's the greatest privilege of my life. Yeah, absolutely learning. And I don't think anyone's got it completely right. Do you respond to all the trolls? No. Do you just sort of completely ignore them? I also don't think that's the best sort of mark. But you've got to have a good support crew around you. You've got to, I think, continue having the conversations. And I find it useful talking to people who also deal with this stuff and just having a yarn about it, having a chat to journalists and similar, because they have a bit of an idea and sort of how they've navigated it. It's always useful. But look, it's weird. It's definitely weird.
It will change over time too as it gets out. The one thing I think about is don't forget what got you there, and also, is it net positive or negative? Like net, if it's 90 bits of good value that go out and I have to deal with 10% of shit that think I'm an absolute prick, and it's like net that's 90 over the 10. That's worth it, right? And so I kind of mentally will write off at the cost of doing business for it. But one thing to the point before about, like having the role in the title, that same minister who I was talking about before, I asked him, basically I got him drunk. I said, yo, on some real shit. I was like, on some real, because it's really cool. I get to meet lots of kind of probably similar to yourself. You meet lots of different people, blah, blah. I said to him, I was like, hey, is it really weird mentally for you to walk into a room and know the power dynamics are so stuffed that you don't know who's trying to be your friend for what you do, not who you are? And he was like, dude, that is fully it. And he was basically talking about how in Wellington it's a bubble and blah, blah. He can't go anywhere because everyone knows exactly who he is, blah, 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 the whole thing. So the power dynamics stuffed. And then everyone obviously wants something from him, whatever. And we talked about this concept of temporary relevance, right? Temporary relevance. Where, for example, this minister, I'm sure, as soon as this switchover happens or whatever, he's now no longer relevant because he's no longer the minister. That all that stuff goes away. And we were talking about the fact of literally in one day you have you're everyone's best mate, and the next day, because you don't have that title, your phone's not going to ring. No one's there to actually help and support you. No one's trying to milk to get anything because you have nothing to then give back. And he was saying it's one of the trickiest things that has to navigate with in his personal life is having a filter to know who's wanting to be close to him for, who he is, for what he does, not who he is, or who he is, not what he does. And then also realizing that as much hype, rah-rah shit as you can get, you're temporarily relevant. And that's something that I guess everyone has to deal with, especially when in these positions they don't drink the Kool-Aid too much. It's been really awesome chatting with you, bro. Before we go, I had another thing that just popped up, which was, you won't see the full thing here, but she said, best Prime Minister we've ever had, at least it was from Mavis Farafara, best Prime Minister we've ever had, at least she's announced that she is resigning, not just like effing Keys just effed off, not to be seen worse than Muldoon. That's what, okay, cool. Oh, geez. Okay, there's some banter in there. But she goes, love our Prime Minister Jacinda. She's a princess. Her family comes first. She's done her deeds. Whānau time now. Blessings to her and her family. Should have had a statue of you, lady. Kia ora, Jacinda. There you go. First half, little aggressive. Next half, okay, that's a good comment.
that cracks me up because Jacinda Ardern did basically exactly what John Key did as well in terms of like how they left. So I mean, John Key left on his own accord as well and decided not to contest the election before 2017, basically around the same time. I think he did in like late December. So I mean, again, it's the sort of thing, that sort of comment I feel like indicates a lot of our conversation from before. Like they're actually pretty similar. But also to your point around the sort of the net and that, I think and the temporary relevance, you've got to be, in my mind, that you do it because you think you can make a difference. If I didn't think I was making a difference in this role, I genuinely would not do it. But I think I can. I think it makes a better difference, and I feel like, again, the benefits that it creates outweighs the people that think it harms, I don't know what, even more. But also I think that, again, if you're genuine, then you're not just temporarily relevant. You're seen to be important. I was going to say useful, but it's more than useful. I feel like, look, I'd like to think that I've made enough friends in some of this work that, if tomorrow I stopped commentating and stopped talking about the economy, that these people wouldn't just completely cut me off. Some of them would. I mean, life is a bit more transactional than just that, but I feel like I'd like to think I put enough into it that it's not just I'll respond to your message. Because put it this way, I mean, look, you and I don't chat that often, mate, but when we do, it's a good yarn. And that's never something that it's purely transactional. I think that's important. You've got to sort of have a bit more of a personal relationship. And again, when that makes a difference, when it's sort of seen to be important, that's where you get the most bang for buck. That's where you get the outcomes that are good.
Well, a bunch of a couple of my friends have done well that are a bit older in age through it. They see the same thing. They're just like, as long as the other side knows what your intent is, they'll give you way more leeway. As long as they know the intent, way more leeway. Hey, I really appreciate your time. I know this was a bit of a last minute thing. I just finished off another call with the crew, and then I was like, yo, gonna flip and have a quick little banter here. And then I was like, yo, flip and text Brad, see if he's out and about. So I was actually surprised you would even be free. I was thinking you'd be in like the cone of silence, flipping like lockdown with all these flipping things going on. But I'm glad that I can still get through to you before the EAs and all the other things start getting in the way to try and start filtering me. So no, I really appreciate it. But enjoy the weekend, my friend, and thanks for jumping in. Great insights. And obviously, you live and breathe that world, so it's awesome to kind of get the validation of some of the things of thinking of what the tone is, and also where the state of New Zealand is ideally moving forward. So and if actually, let's give a quick little plug. You obviously do a bunch of work that's getting out and about. You were just saying you just released some stuff. If people want to check out more of what you're up to, where can they go? What can they do?
Best place will be the Infometrics website, infometrics.co.nz. And if people have any want to follow me and sort of see the random travels around the country, Brad Olsen NZL on most of the major socials. Always good to see people engaging with it.
I mean, that's also hypothetically a great way to build a future like fan base of, if you actually go into you may be going to more regions than half the politicians. I'm not to say, look, if the day comes, we'll recall this back through. Hey, enjoy the weekend, brother. Have fun in Wellies. I'll talk to you soon, eh?
Cheers.
My man. Later, brother. Good shit, bro. Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Olsen, flipping good bastard. Like his style, like his insights, and it's rad that he gets in the mix with such a crazy world, and especially at such a young age, which is cool too. So he's on fire, ripping, and it's great that we can get in the mix. Hope you have a good weekend, whatever it is that you're up to. I hope all is well. Hope you like a little new setup. I've decided I'm going to be doing more of these things, sort of a pop up and enjoying it. If I can help in any way, feel free to reach out. If you hope you do good, do great, and adios. And I'll see you soon. Now I got to try and figure out how to end the stream. How do I do it? How does the technology? Here we go. Boom. Can we fundraise?